Now let's discuss the adrenal glands. Well, these glands, they are associated with the kidneys, right? So they are located above the kidneys and they look like a cap over the kidneys. So if you see in the image, these adrenal glands, they look like a cap over the kidneys, right? So they are located above the kidneys, fitted like a cap. Now these adrenal glands, if you look at the anatomy of the adrenal glands, they have two regions. They have an outer region that we call as the cortex and the inner region that we call as the medulla. So we have outer portion that is the cortex and the inner portion that is the medulla. So we can call it as adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla respectively. Now if you see at the cortex region, the outer portion, you will see that it is surrounded by a layer, this fibrous layer which we call as the capsule, right? The adrenal cortex is surrounded by a fibrous layer that we call as the capsule. Now we will see why do we call the adrenal glands as the glands of emergency. Why do we call them so? Let's see. Well, when we talk about these glands, we are going to talk about the hormones obviously, right? So let's begin with the hormones that are secreted by the adrenal cortex, the outer portion of your adrenal gland. So there are three classifications based on the types of hormones. We have mineralocorticoids, we have glucocorticoids and we have gonadocorticoids or sex corticoids. Now here you are going to see this term, that is zona glomerulus. Well, what does this mean? You know, when you are going to see actually the inner structure, you will see that the adrenal cortex is divided into three zones. And these zones are the zona glomerulus, the zona fasciculata and the zona reticularis. So for just very easy understanding, let us just understand what I am trying to say. Let's see the zona glomerulus first. This is the first zone, as you can see. So this first zone, it forms the 15% of the adrenal cortex. It forms 15% of the adrenal cortex. Now you can see that there are very small spherical cells that are very much compactly arranged. And the cells of the zona glomerulus, they are going to secrete what? Mineralocorticoids. They are going to secrete mineralocorticoids. Now as the name suggests, what are these mineralocorticoids? Mineralocorticoids are going to affect mineral metabolism. And when we talk about mineral, I mean to say I am talking about sodium primarily. I am going to talk about what? Sodium primarily. So sodium and potassium, these are the two major minerals that we are going to talk in case of mineralocorticoids. So what I have explained you till now, just be very clear with that the first zone, that is the zona glomerulus, the cells of this zone, it is going to secrete what? It is going to secrete mineralocorticoids which are going to affect the mineral metabolism. So as the name suggests, mineralocorticoids means they are going to affect mineral metabolism, and here we will talk about the sodium and the potassium, right? Now the main hormone that is under this mineralocorticoids, that is the aldosterone. The main hormone is the aldosterone, and we call this aldosterone hormone as the salt retaining hormone. We call this as salt retaining hormone. Now why we call this as salt retaining hormone? Because this hormone is secreted when the sodium content is low in your blood. So that is why it is going to retain salt in your blood. That is why it is going to be secreted when the sodium content is going to be low in your blood. So what is going to happen in whole? You will see that it is going to regulate the sodium content of the body. It is going to regulate the sodium content of the body because it targets the cells of the kidney. So it is going to stimulate the kidneys to release more sodium into the blood and to excrete more potassium. Potassium is going to be excreted out and sodium is going to be released into the bloodstream. So what is going to happen as a whole? In the bloodstream, since the sodium is going to increase, means due to osmosis, water can enter from outside to inside. Due to osmosis, water can enter from outside to inside. Now what is this osmosis? You already know it very well that osmosis is the movement of free water molecules from the region of their higher concentration to the region of their lower concentration, right. So, water which is at higher concentration outside is going to enter inside this bloodstream. So, what is going to happen? Since there will be more water in the blood, means the volume of the blood is going to increase. So, now we have two effects. The sodium content in the blood is going to be regulated, it is going to increase because of the hormone, that is aldosterone, and secondly the volume of the blood is going to increase because of the entry of free water molecules inside this, right. So, these are the two major effects of this hormone, that is aldosterone, which you can also call it as salt retaining hormone, and this comes under the category of mineralocorticoids which are secreted by the cells of Zona Glomerulus, right. So, next type we have the glucocorticoids. Now, these glucocorticoids, as the name suggests, they are going to deal with glucose metabolism, means I can say carbohydrate metabolism, but they do not only deal with carbohydrate metabolism, they also deal with protein and fat metabolism as well. So, under glucocorticoids we have cortisol, corticosterone and cortisone, these three hormones. But in major, the most abundant hormone secreted by by this zona fasciculata cells, right, that is the cortisol. So, remember that glucocorticoids, they are secreted by the second zone, that is zona fasciculata, right. We have zona fasciculata, and this zona fasciculata cells, they are, you can say, elongated, branched, and they secrete the glucocorticoids, and the major glucocorticoid is the cortisol. 95% it is the cortisol. So, most abundant hormone under the category of glucocorticoids is the cortisol hormone. Now, what are the effects of these glucocorticoids? Well, these glucocorticoids, they majorly they increase the glucose content in your blood. So, when they are going to increase the glucose content in your blood, this is going to be an anti-insulin effect, because insulin does what? Insulin actually reduces that glucose content in your blood, it regulates that. But the glucocorticoids, they are going to increase the glucose content in your blood from non-carbohydrate sources, right. And what are those non-carbohydrate sources? They are the proteins, they are the fats, amino acids. So, from the non-carbohydrate sources, they are going to what? They are going to form glucose, and they are going to increase the glucose content in your blood, and this process by which we can have glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, the process is known as gluconeogenesis. The process is actually gluconeogenesis, means the increase in the glucose content by the metabolism of non-carbohydrate sources. Example is proteins and fats. So, the glucocorticoids, they are going to stimulate liver to form glucose from non-carbohydrate sources by the process that we call as gluconeogenesis. Now, this cortisol hormone, it has other effects also. Now, the other effects of the cortisol, one of the other effect of cortisol is that they actually decrease the lymphocytes in your blood. They increase the RBCs but decrease the lymphocyte in your blood. So, when the lymphocytes are decreased in your blood, right, and RBCs are increased in your blood, this is one of the major effect that is produced by this release of the hormone, that is cortisol. Now, this cortisol hormone is also known as anti-stress hormone. It is also known as anti-stress hormone. Why? Because it is secreted to deal with the stress situations in your body. So, when there are stress situations in the body, this hormone cortisol is released. That is why we call this hormone as an anti-stress hormone, right? It is what? It is an anti-stress hormone. And remember, it is anti-inflammatory also. It is going to reduce pain in your body. It is going to reduce pain, so it is anti-inflammatory. So, these are a few functions of the hormone, that is the cortisol hormone, which is a part of the glucocorticoids. Next type we have the sex corticoids or the gonadocorticoids. So, which zone is going to secrete these gonadocorticoids? This zone is the zona reticularis. It is the zona reticularis which forms only 7% of the whole adrenal cortex, right. So major part of the adrenal cortex is, taken by the zone fasciculata and the least by the zona reticularis. So the zona reticularis cells, they are going to release and secrete the hormone, that is gonadocorticoids. They are going to release gonadocorticoids. And what are the two major hormones of gonadocorticoids? These are the androgens and estrogens. Androgens in case of males and estrogens in case of females. So as the name suggests, the gonadocorticoids, the target organs for them are the gonads. They are going to help in the you can say the formation of the secondary sexual characters. They are going to help in the formation of secondary sexual characters in males and females, right. So androgens in case of males and estrogens in case of females, right. So remember that the sex is determined by the genes, right, but the development of the secondary sexual characters which are going to differentiate between a male and a female, for that reason we need the secretion of these hormones by the adrenal glands. So it is not going to be mandatory that just because of the genes the baby will be a baby boy and the baby will be a baby girl, but the release of the hormones so that the secondary sexual characters are properly developed, it is equally very important. So these are the gonadocorticoids, that is androgens and the estrogens. Moving on to the inner substance, that is the medulla. We are going to deal with the adrenal medulla. Now the two major hormones of adrenal medulla are the adrenaline, that is epinephrine, and we have noradrenaline, that is norepinephrine. So the adrenaline hormone is known as emergency hormone. Why we call this as emergency hormone? Because it is secreted during emergency situations. For example, if you see a lion in front of you, what you are going to do? You are going to run very fast because you are scared, right? So in that case, you want to save your life. When you want to save your life, you are going to run fast. There is going to be, a more faster breathing rate, more faster heartbeat. So these situations are dealt with these emergency hormones, that is the adrenaline and the noradrenaline. What is the major difference between the actions of adrenaline and noradrenaline hormone? Well, you can just make out that the overall effect of the hormones is same. What is the major effect? These hormones regulate blood pressure under normal conditions, but noradrenaline is going to regulate blood pressure under normal conditions, but this adrenaline hormone is going to act during emergency situations. It is going to act during emergency situations. So these two hormones, they have you can say integrated effect. They actually closely relate their effect with the sympathetic nervous system of your body. So what are the effects of the sympathetic nervous system of your body? They are going to help in the involuntary movements. For example, the muscles of your heart. So that is under the control of the sympathetic nervous system of the body. So with the sympathetic nervous system, these adrenal glands, they are going to integrate their actions. How? They are going to secrete these hormones, that is adrenaline and noradrenaline. As I told you, adrenaline is the major emergency hormone. Why? Because it is going to deal with emergency situations, as I have given an example already. So if we talk about epinephrine and norepinephrine, that is adrenaline and noradrenaline, they have majorly the same type of effects, but adrenaline has greater effect on cardiac activity as compared to noradrenaline. But it produces weak constrictions of blood vessels. It produces weak constriction of blood vessels as compared to noradrenaline. But as a whole, the metabolic activity is quite higher in case of adrenaline than noradrenaline. So this hormone causes higher metabolic activity as compared to noradrenaline. Now what does noradrenaline do? Let us just read this. It regulates blood pressure under normal conditions. It causes constriction of all blood vessels of the body, and it leads to increased activity of the heart. But remember, in this case, adrenaline has greater effect on the cardiac activity, on your heart, I mean to say. So there are no major differences, but the difference just lies between these 2 points. You can make out that this is released under emergency situation and this works under normal conditions. This adrenaline hormone has greater effect on cardiac activity as compared to noradrenaline. It shows weaker constriction of blood vessels, and here the constriction of blood vessels is quite more in case of noradrenaline, right. So this is just a slight difference between the action of these two hormones, that is adrenaline and noradrenaline, right. So as a whole, since the hormones of the adrenal gland, they are going to help us to cope up with the emergency situations, that is why we call these glands as the glands of emergency. We call these glands as glands of emergency. They have another name also, that is suprarenal glands. Why we call this as suprarenal glands? Because they are linked with which organ? You can see, just make out that they are linked with the kidneys. They are located above the kidneys, just like a cap over the kidneys, and that is why we call them as suprarenal glands also. So adrenal glands, suprarenal glands, or glands of emergency, they are the names which correlate with the location, with the function, right. And remember that they have two portions. We have an outer cortex and we have inner medulla. They have different hormones that are secreted. We have different cells. We have discussed briefly about the three zones that are there, the zona glomerulus, the zona fasciculata, the zona reticularis, and the types of hormones they secrete, right. And remember that this gland is known as the gland of emergency, and the hormone of this emergency hormone is what? This is the adrenaline hormone, which is secreted by what? The adrenal medulla, right. Just remember the names, because just remembering the names you can also make out the function or the action of these hormones that is going to be there inside our bodies when they are going to be secreted.